Coming up on Cruise Radio and Company, Danny Sachs with another tale from the Johnny Kidd Files. Please stay tuned, won't you?
6 months ago, a night watchman was making his rounds near the Hawaii Kai Marina boat docks when he spotted an object floating in the water. It was the body of a former Honolulu cop. I was working late in the shop way after midnight when I wanted a cigarette really bad. It was exceptionally muggy and still in Hawaii Kai that night. On nights like that, you could smell the marina, and sometimes it'd stink, and this was one of those times. So I locked up the garage real tight, slid a steel bar through the door hinge, jumped into my El Camino, and drove down to the gas station. The Chevron had been closed for hours, but I wedged a pack of smokes earlier behind the payphone on the side of the station. Thought it'd be easier to quit if I didn't keep the pack with me. That never helped. As I lit a cigarette, I noticed some short guy with a big gut walking toward me from across the parking lot. It was Roland Martina. He looked different out of uniform. Roland was one of the neighborhood cops who used to frequent the gas station while on duty. He was huffing and puffing like he just ran a 20-mile marathon. "Hey, Roland," I said, "what are you doing out this late?" His shorts and t-shirt were dirty, and he smelled bad as the marina. As he approached my El Camino, he reached behind his back and pulled out a revolver and set it down on the hood. Took a moment to catch his breath and then asked me if I had seen any suspicious white cars driving around that night. Anything out of the ordinary. "No, I didn't see anybody. I just came from the shop," I told him. "I wanted a cigarette." "What's with the gun, man?" I asked him. Just then a white car did drive by. A four-door sedan. A newer sedan. I don't know what make or model it was. It could have been a Lincoln for all I know, but at that very second, Martina grabbed the gun off the hood and jumped into the back of the El Camino, face down. I mean, I never saw a big guy like that move so fast. He yelled, "Drive!" I said, "What?" He said, "Don't ask questions, just drive." And he stuck his arm up and pointed to the highway as he laid there face down. I said, "Okay." I got in the El Camino and I pulled out into the street. I yelled through my window, "Where are we going?" He said, "I don't care, just keep driving. Are there any cars following you?" I said, "No, there's nobody following me. There's nobody on the road, man. It's 2 o'clock in the morning." So I drove down Honolulu Home Road. I didn't know where to take him. I didn't know where to go, so I pulled into the nearby fire station. I pulled into the back parking lot. Nobody noticed. There wasn't a soul around. I don't even think there were firemen there that night. So I pulled into the parking lot and I got out and asked him, "What's going on?" He was still in the back of the El Camino, sitting up, and all he kept saying was if anybody was following me. Was anybody following? Did I notice anybody following? All we drove was about 2 miles down the road. All I went was 2 miles. I told him, "Roland, there's nobody out here. There's not a car in sight." He said, "Then just take me back to the shopping center." And he got in. Wow, did he smell bad. He got into the El Camino in the passenger seat. Man, I drove down Honolulu Home Road and I pulled into the shopping center, back where we started, and pulled into the gas station. He got out and I said, "What's going on, Roland?" And that's when he told me. He said, "Danny, I didn't rip you off. I know you didn't. I don't know what he was talking about." At that moment, I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know any of this. He says, "I didn't rip you off. I didn't rip you off. I just want you to know that." Now, Roland was one of the cops who oftentimes come by my shop and use the phone. I never bothered to ask who they were calling. It wasn't any of my business. Hey, this is Danny on KRUZ. Now, you've been listening to On the Run. Stay tuned to part 2, coming up pretty soon. And thanks for tuning in to 2-Bit Tales in the After Midnight Ramble on KRUZ. Now, Roland was one of the cops who'd oftentimes come by my shop and use the phone. I never bothered to ask who they were calling. It wasn't any of my business. Turns out, Roland was staking out the neighborhood for potential homes to burglarize. He'd use my garage phone to report back what he saw to an organized ring of thieves. I found that out later, the hard way. At the same time, Roland was already under suspicion and being watched by Internal Affairs, and he knew it. So to keep the ring informed without making direct contact with him, he'd make a list of addresses, times he saw people home, what kinds of cars were parked in the driveway, the whole rundown on potential homes to be hit. And then he'd stick his folded observation sheet behind the phone where I kept my cigarettes, and then someone would pick it up later. Like I said, that way, Roland had no direct contact with his crew. That's what he was doing at the station that night. But when he jumped into the El Camino, the list fell out. I guess he never got a chance to put it behind the phone. I still don't know who he was running from. Maybe it was Internal Affairs, or other cops that he screwed over in the past. I just don't know. Anyway, after the list was picked up, the organization would select a house from it and hit it. They'd make sure to leave signs of a break-in and take something small, but just big enough that would provoke the homeowner to call the cops. Roland would usually be the first one on the scene and make a false breaking and entering report. In doing so, he'd find out where they kept their jewelry and other valuables, if they had a safe and works of art around the house, what time they went to work and returned, if they had dogs, if they had an alarm, the whole 9 yards. And then a few days later, they'd hit the same house again, big time. Truck and all would pull into the driveway, and they'd just about clean out the whole house. Now, not knowing any of that yet, I went back the next night to get another cigarette, and there was a black town car in the bay. I didn't think anything at first, so I drove around to the side of the gas station, opened the door to the El Camino, and went for my pack. 4 guys slowly got out of that black car. 3 of them stayed back while one guy came right up to me. He was an average build guy, about 30, but you could see in his eyes he had no feeling. Numb, man, truly scary. He pushed me against the phone. I knew instinctively you couldn't talk to this guy. No way. I've seen that look before in the criminals cops would sometimes apprehend near the station. You can't reason with a guy like that. I didn't know who he was or who they were. I was wearing my gas station shirt, so I thought if I told them that I worked there, they'd let me go. "Hey, I work here," I said. "I pump gas during the day." Man, I had to use the bathroom so bad at that moment. And the door was right next to me, next to the payphone. But I couldn't move. That SOB had me against the phone hard, man. I felt the edge of the booth cut between my shoulder blades. We were so close I could smell his garlic breath. Another guy, Filipino maybe, got out of the car and spoke pidgin, broken English. He asked me, "Where's the list?" "What list?" I said. "I don't know about any list." "Hey, no act stupid," he said. "I know you friends with Martina, the cop." And then he pointed to Roland sitting in the car. A light from the parking lot was shining on his face. He looked scared. He had on the same t-shirt from the night before, but he wasn't moving. "He gave you a list last night. We seen you here last night with him," the Filipino guy said to me. I looked over at Roland again, sitting in the car. I knew they weren't fooling around. "I don't know, maybe what you're looking for fell out of his pocket," I said. "Roland sat in the back of my El Camino last night. Maybe it fell out in there." I tried to break free from that guy who was holding me, so I raised my right foot and pushed against the planter box that acted as a divider between the station and parking lot. It was a stone planter box about 20 feet long, full of small palms, but I couldn't move. I wanted to go over to the El Camino and lift up the mat, the bed liner, Maybe it was underneath, I thought. But then I realized, if that list fell out of his pocket and into the bed, it would have surely blown away hours ago. I didn't want to tell him that Roland actually jumped into the back of the El Camino, and I took him for a ride out of the station. At that moment, the Filipino guy looked in the bed of the El Camino, ran his hand across the cracks in the bed liner, and then said, "Come on, we go." And just like that, they left. And that was the last time I saw Martina alive. Maybe Roland Martina wanted to quit after conspiring to help them with a couple of burglaries, but couldn't because the ring threatened to use his HPD position against him. Maybe they said they'd turn him into internal affairs if he didn't continue. Who knows? But he did get busted and was convicted for conspiracy to commit burglary. About a month after getting roughed up, though, I found that list of addresses and timesheet. It wasn't in the El Camino after all. It was in the planter box next to the bathrooms at the gas station. And my address was on that list, but it had been crossed out. And next to it, it read, "Garage only. Kid works at nights." A decade later, I heard a rumor that Roland had been flipping burgers for a couple years. And then on one of those muggy, still nights, they found Martina's partially charred body floating in the marina.